Greetings, brothers and sisters. So this is what I consider to be an epic video, sort of a breakthrough video, in talking about the epic failure of human beings, specifically to do with America, but this could be applied worldwide in terms of so many things, in terms of our ability to conceptualize reality, choices made, and just the state of human beings, and making any kind of a case that there's something to be saved here in terms of, our culture and way of life and all the rest of it. And so I'm going to cover this in three different stories: the election of Joe Biden, the trust the plan mentality behind the Q community, bumper sticker mentality, and then the COVID agenda, the COVID protocols and things like this. So to start off with, I had this realization in meditation because I forgot to discuss this in my many Q videos recently. The bumper sticker mentality, and it's not just with Q. It's a man, it's flat. Trust the plan. And so what would happen is somebody would be trying to make a point, and they would just, with no, abstract thought or explanation or reasoning, they would just blurt out a bumper sticker line. I saw this more and more as the truth community evolved or de-evolved. De-evolved is really what it is. More and more bumper sticker talk. Another one was, do your research. Like they would say something like one line, that wasn't very telling, wasn't very clear. And they say, do your own research, which, again, when you're talking to bumper stickers, you're not doing your own research. People say that, do your own research, but what that really means is watch somebody else's videos and presentation and have them explain it to you, and then you adopt that as reality without thinking. And so bumper sticker talk is the opposite of what's supposed to exist in the truth community, which is critical thinking skills, thinking for yourself, analyzing, and having an internalized experience of weighing all the various variables and doing research on both sides of the subject matter and coming to a conclusion and understanding whether the conclusion is actually factual or just something that is, 80%. And you think it's like 80% possibility of being true or whatever, some speculation or whatever, but making a reasonable assessment using all your faculties and ultimately using your heart as well, because that brings in God into the equation, and going through a process, maybe, dreams, maybe some intuition stuff going on, maybe going for some walks and letting the thing to digest and whatever, sort of incubate in your system, and you're now trying to figure out what you're seeing, right? It takes some process, right? Internalized process, instead of just listening to somebody work on your emotions and, tell you things that you are like that agree with your worldview and your ego or something, your psyche, your identity, and just go with something without actually thinking your way through it. Not just thinking, because that, it's more than just that. And so these bumper stickers, these slogans are just the most remedial level of expression. And trust the plan. Think about the power of trust the plan. Because if you think about QBs and what they fell for was an invisible sort of imaginary, an abstract, anonymous person that hasn't proven anything to you and is talking in, riddles and code, doesn't even give you the full answer, right? Just gives you like little bits of information. The idea here being that somebody who's in the professional level of the spy community, somebody on the highest level of the intelligence community, somebody who's trained in this, and talking about all these trained operatives, people that, live and work in deception all the time in terms of the intelligence community, and that they're working to get rid of the bad guys, and they need your help. Like, they need your help. Like out of some bad B movie, like that movie where they dropped, they put, I forget the name of it, but they put Starfighter or something like this. They put a video game out there across the universe, and if you were really good at the video game, they would come recruit you to fight aliens, right? Some space battles and things like this. There's always this element in movies where they take some random person and turn them into a spy or an operative or something. They need your help. They need your help. You get your Q decoder ring out, and I'll talk in code. Well, he doesn't have to talk in code because he's already announcing his plan, the plan, to the enemies, to the deep state, knows about his plan because he's told everybody on 4chan. And they have a team of well-trained people with governmental power, right? And you're up against them, but we need you. We need your help. You junior spy and whatever it is, right? And here, but I'm going to talk in code. You guys got to figure it out. And that's going to go well. I'm going to just, leave it up to you to fill in the gaps, right? And, so these people fell for this. I mean, just ridiculous ploy. And the hero was a reality TV star who had showed his character over and over again. He was a public figure, a flim-flam man who had gone bankrupt multiple times. And I like Trump. I mean, I've talked about it. He's got he's a funny character in the show. Like this is as a show, but it's not somebody you would trust and think was going to be your savior. And this idea that you had to save the children from these evil pedos, right? This was the thing to get its emotional hooks into the people. But this, main figure who was Jeffrey Epstein, this main villain, Trump is on record saying that Jeffrey likes young girls, joking about it, like he knew. I mean, him and Jeffrey were friends. You see them hanging out in videos, and they had multiple interactions with each other. And people were like, well, we'll just dismiss that altogether because this guy's our hero and the other guy's our guru. Q, this anonymous person's our guru. And even after countless failures and dates and things that were never achieved and just disinformation being perpetrated, there was this element of trust the plan. You got to trust the plan. No matter how many times there's a failure, no matter how many times the door gets shut in your face, no matter how much evidence is out there that they're using you to screw everybody over, right? And then ultimately, trust the plan became this idea that for this thing to work, for the plan to work, we got to get rid of all your rights. We got to get, you have to give up everything. Martial law, military on the street, give up all your constitutional rights, everything that makes America what America is, the things that you value as patriots. We got to give all that up. We got to, literally the worst possible ideas. Secret military tribunals where they're just grabbing citizens off the street and persecuting them, bringing them to Guantanamo Bay and having these secret trials and executing them. This was what a large segment of the population, we're talking of millions upon millions of people that were claiming to be, truthers, claiming to be people who were able to see through the veil of illusion, were willing to give up and sign off on. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's so twisted and scary. Trust the plan. And what it speaks to, this is the outcome, that we've had controlled journalism, controlled by the government to whatever extent, by corporations, and, it is a very narrow bandwidth of the truth. And the government withholds information. And whenever you watch some sort of, one of these shows, I've talked about this in recent videos, these conspiratorial shows and science fiction shows or something that's happened, the government always withholds information or lies to the public. And so then you had this idea of ordinary people doing journalism. And like I said, there had been these narratives around about the Federal Reserve. My brother did this on AM radio, that about 1 or 2%, 0.1 or 0.2% of the population, very small amount, less than 1% of the population really knew about. And if you talked about it, you were considered crazy. They made that conspiracy theory movie with Mel Gibson, right? So then the internet gave this, ability for ordinary people to make news-like content and do sort of investigative journalism because of the ability to do research on the internet for information. There's all this information that everybody has on display. When I was a kid, they you had to go to the library, and you had to, I had to do this as, writing a research paper. You had to go to the library, you had to go through the card catalog, and they had this stuff called microfiche and microfilm. And it had all these papers, like the New York Times or whatever it was, that were reduced to these little photographs, these slide photographs, and there was a machine that would magnify it. And so you had all this, stuff that had been documented, and you had to find it, in physical form, and then read through the article. And of course, you couldn't copy and paste and things like this. You had to write down the stuff, the quotes that we're going to use to develop your research, right? Where now there's so much more information globally. All these, newspapers and things are stored on the internet, and not just newspapers, but all of this stuff. And so all of a sudden now ordinary people could do their own research, to quote a bumper sticker, and develop narratives and, various storylines. And it was like, all right, this is kind of great. And it opened up, and, I was a part of this thing called the Truth Community, where there was the official story, and now ordinary people could look beyond the, BS of the official story and develop more telling and realistic narratives. But then a couple of things happened, including the Q movement and just the people who were the Trumpers and, bad actors, either people who wanted to make financial, have a financial boon. There was foreign, ordinary citizens that knew that they could work Americans by putting up clickbait titles and making up stuff. Because, they said Americans will just believe all this stuff, right? The right-wing people, when the whole pizza thing was coming out. And they were making a ton of money off ads, especially for their country, because they were making, American revenue in their country. And so they were putting up these bogus websites. And then there was the disinformation by disinformation agents. And then there was just ordinary people lying and making things up and exaggerating things. And that took off. And then ultimately you had this Q movement where an anonymous source worked the far right up into a frenzy and, desperate behaviors that they were so hard to deal with for the rest of us, hostile and challenging and just a nightmare. And they came up with this ultimate plan of martial law where President Trump, the reality TV star Flim Flam Man, who everybody else kind of knew what this guy was, right? Certainly not the leader and the savior and the saint that the QBs were making him out to be, and that there would be martial law and insurrection and, secret military tribunals and all these things. That was their solution, their patriotic solution. And, got worked up into a mob and played, in terms of this Capitol Hill riot, so that the mainstream people can now say, look, we got to censor the crap out of you. See what happens when we let you guys do your own research. See what happens when we let you guys try to figure things out for yourself. See what happens. Look at what happens here. You got to get your news from these controlled, authoritative sources, because look at how stupid you guys are. Look at how crazy you guys are. Look at, you got worked up into a mob based in this ridiculous stuff. Look at it. I mean, they completely played, a large segment of the population, Trump supporters and QBs. And we're talking about millions upon millions of people. There's at least 1 million people that showed up in Washington, D.C. And then there's all the Alex Jones supporters, right? People who have, followed that guy for years. He's got millions of followers too. I mean, you're talking about a large segment of the so-called truth community, probably that makes up 4/5 of the so-called truth community. I mean, it's not really truthers. And so, what can we all say? Do you understand this? You can't defend this. You can't say that this is now the truth community is not a danger, like it's not, Look at how people get worked up. Plus, they were using Trump. They were comparing Trump to a Hitler-like figure. That's what they were saying Trump was. And, he's saying all his supporters are racist and things like this, and that they're this dangerous mob. And, you signed off on, you are pushing for martial law, the military takeover of an election, regardless of what you think happened in the election, because that's not the point. The point isn't what you think happened. The point is your solution, that you're willing to break the whole country and break the Constitution and break all of these civil liberties and rights that you so desperately cling to, because once that happened, America would never be the same, where the military was used to impose its will, and the military's not trained to govern. The military is never a solution. Think about all these illegal wars we just had, and what the military has done all over the world and things like this. Just the incredibly abusive training that the cadets go through, the Marine training. If you've seen this movie, Full Metal Jacket, I had buddies in college that went through that training on Parris Island in South Carolina, a hot place with mosquitoes and they go through hell there, and they're broken psychologically. I was watching this show, this movie a little bit in Hacksaw Ridge, where this guy is, it was a true story. Some guy was somebody who he was a pacifist, but he wanted to serve in the army, and so he wouldn't fire a weapon. And so their solution was to abuse him and turn his fellow soldiers against him in boot camp to punish him for not be willing to kill other people. These things happen. Our military is a indoctrination program, and so these soldiers that are trained to kill, and they're psychologically messed up. And talk to people who've been in the military. Talk to people who have suffered from PTSD, fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam. My brother, somebody that I know about the horrors of war and things like this. And so the soldiers were never a solution. Having soldiers on the street was never a solution. So they, you made the case for these Cubies made the case, and not only Cubies, but the Trumpers and the Alex Jones people. You've made the case for censorship. You've made the case for the powers that be saying, we can't let these guys think for themselves. We got to censor. We got to control them. And, what can you say to it? It's indefensible. For me, it's indefensible. And so it's wrecked the whole truth community. It's wrecked ordinary people because we don't have editors. We don't have people that are saying, no, you can't post that. That's not true. People don't have the ability to understand what journalistic integrity is, understand what, journalistic process is. And so people just hear something and then post it on the internet without fact-checking it or verifying it, and it becomes something that circulates, and you're trying people, you're condemning people, many of whom are not good people, but without any evidence or a court trial or any of these things. Just announcing things on the internet, like Isaac Cappy saying Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg are pedos, but not providing any evidence or context for that, right? Just announcing it, and people saying, well, he was in Thor. He was an extra in Thor. He must know something. Roseanne was doing the same thing, and people taking that as fact when no facts were provided. Not that I'm saying that these people are innocent, but you need a lot more than somebody just spurting something out. You need to prove it in some way, right? And you need to understand what's speculation, and you need to be able to hear both sides of the story. And that's not what was happening, right? That's not what's happened. The demonization of the so-called elites, but you're willing to persecute people. You're willing to send them to Gitmo just based in stuff that's being circulated around in the internet. So how are you better? If you had power, you would be as bad of a tyrant or worse than these so-called controllers. And then you have Joe Biden. Then you have this unbelievable thing that happened, because now we're talking about mainstream media. So that's, the condemnation of the truth media, where individuals, what happened, that way that played out, the worst of the worst of humanity's, trust the plan, bumper sticker mentality, and willing to give up all their rights based in a deception. That's, that plays really poorly. And then you have the mainstream media and them pushing Joe Biden and him being accepted. Think about this. Why would anybody in their right mind think Joe Biden would make a good president? The guy failed as a candidate multiple times. The first time he was exposed as being a plagiarizer. This is easy evidence to find out because it's on news footage and things. It's easy to see and figure out that the guy took other people's stories and speeches and pretended they were his stories and his speeches, and he got caught and he was exposed, and he polled at less than 1%, and he slunk out of his presidential candidacy with his tail between his legs. But then he ran again. He lost to people like Walter Mondale and, the caucus. And then he ran finally again against Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And he sucked. He was not even, he was polling at less than 1%. Less than 1% of Democrats wanted him as their candidate. Nobody thought this guy would be a good candidate. But Obama made him his, gaffer in chief, his vice president, so that he would, have somebody else that would be this bumbling sidekick. That's what presidents often do. And JoJo did his job to the best of his ability, right? He was a great gaffer. He made natural gaffes and things like this. So when Obama's second term was done, they needed a Democratic candidate. And JoJo was the likely successor because he was the most recognizable name and he was the former vice president. So you would think that he would have been, the logical choice. He had the connections and the power and he had the name recognition. But the powers that be, like CNN did a hit piece on him, and Jon Stewart and David Letterman, all these comedians were doing hit pieces on him to make sure that he didn't run. They chose Hillary Clinton, and they exposed all of these, him being a sniffler and a snoozler and a groper, all these things. They exposed all of it, right, on these CNN hit pieces, and they made it perfectly clear to him, the media, that he shouldn't run. Hillary was, he was polling at like 10% or something like this. And even though he didn't officially run for president, it still counts as a rejection. He was rejected by the media and the voters who chose Hillary Clinton, one of the worst politicians, who had just lost to Barack Obama in a, brutal primary defeat to a newbie. Obama was a newbie, and Hillary Clinton was a lifer, and she was a horrible candidate and unlikable. But they chose her over Biden. And Biden, didn't officially announce, but it was another rejection. So that's 4 rejections where everyone said, we don't want you to be president. And most of those rejections came when he was in his prime, when he had better thinking capabilities. And so after 4 years of Trump, and he's now much older, he's 78 years old. The life expectancy in the U.S. is 78. So the average person is already dead or dying when JoJo is now taking on the hardest job of his life, right? And so he's going to be 82 by the time his presidency ends. And, he's showing signs of mentally breaking down. And so he ran against a bunch of horrible candidates in the Democratic primary. And I watched the debates, and I covered this, and he was the worst one. If I had to hire anybody else for any job, like if I had a choice, these were my potential, candidates for the job, JoJo would have been the last pick in pretty much every job. I can't imagine what job JoJo would do. Like I said, for Democrats, would you want this guy driving your kid's school bus, like somebody who is showing signs of mental breakdown? Would you want this guy doing any job that involved something that your life depended on it? Would you get in the passenger seat with him driving? Somebody who's clearly not functioning very well, physically and mentally. And so they hid this guy away. They forced him through. Like, he only polled at 20%, and that was based in name recognition and having more money and more, power and more of a system, an electoral system behind him. He was, inheriting Obama's team, Obama's people, and the money Obama had from donors and things like this. JoJo was tapped into all those things, and the Clinton stuff and all of it, right? He was the centrist candidate of choice because he was a known entity that they knew that they could control, and he was their chosen guy. But the people didn't like him. The Democrats he only got 20% of the vote. He lost big time in Ohio and New Hampshire. He finished 4th and 5th in those places, or 5th and 6th or whatever it was, even though he was the front runner going through this thing. And they still handed him the primary victory, screwing Bernie Sanders over, where they did this out in public, where Democratic officials, senators, and people in charge of the Democratic Party went on national TV and said, we can't let Bernie win. Bernie's not going to win. And they basically rigged it so JoJo would win. And so with all of that, so easily for people to see, and all of his liabilities, all of his, his gaffes, his, misquotes, his weird things that he said, the snoozling, groping, and all these things that he did. With all of that, the American people still got behind him to whatever extent, right? Whatever you want to think about what happened in terms of the election, enough people voted for Joe Biden, even though they hid him away. They didn't even let him campaign, which is the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Like they literally locked the guy up in the basement, didn't let him, speak without scripted lines and very short interviews. They didn't let him travel around and all these things using COVID as a cover. And the American people just went with it anyway because that's what the media told them they were supposed to do. The media told them that Trump was evil and that JoJo was the only solution. And even though they didn't particularly like JoJo or whatever, they just wanted to put the end to the drama, the Trump drama. Certainly the Democrats were already tired of Trump, and they were going to turn out. And there was epic turnout in terms of voter turnout because of that, because of the Trump factor. And so you have this idea of social media, the idea of people using their own abilities to report things, being completely shut down and embarrassed by the Q movement, and then you have mainstream media just completely working the American people and forcing Joe Biden on them, and people just accepting it. Yeah, this is the best we could have. This is what we deserve. And not, not any sort of a red flag and saying, no, we want better than Joe Biden. We can't, this guy isn't presidential material. But they've just accepted him. I mean, this is the condemnation of the American consciousness. Like this is just, the TV shows that people watch, the crappy TV shows with the laugh track and just sitting there staring at the TV like a zombie as this, dumbed down. I mean, such remedial content. It's aimed at children. Like children, should aspire to more complex and more realistic TV programming or whatever it is, internet stuff. But people are just completely zombified right now. I mean, both cases, whether it's people-inspired media like on the, the truth stuff, the truther community stuff, that's been played out. That's been exposed right now because of the QBs and the Trumpers. I mean, it's been, it's an embarrassment for all of us. And then the mainstream media, the best that they can do is push JoJo out there, right? When they know, I mean, they're just coming out and lying. Because you know what they said about him 4 years ago when they were demonizing him because they didn't want him to run against Hillary Clinton. They already exposed that they know all these negatives and they hid all these things purposefully, and the American people fell for it. That's the bigger part. The American people fell for this. The QBs fell for this idea of martial law, right? And secret military tribunals out of their desperation and they're being psychologically manipulated. And, became a mob and wrote scary things on the internet and did things that made everybody say, hey, they're a danger to us all. We got to shut down the internet. We got to clamp down on these civil liberties because of their behavior. And then you have the mainstream people, the Democrats and the liberals, who voted in Joe Biden, who was an obvious disaster and horrible candidate. And so this is the state of the human being in America right now. We're like, a failed species. And then you have like the mask wearing. And, this is another aspect because you can physically see it. That without any real evidence being presented, like any scientific evidence, like in terms of this is what masks do and this is why you're wearing them. There's never been a discussion, nor the possible harmful effects and the constrictions to your breathing, right? So when you put on a mask, it makes it harder to breathe. You're taking off your mask and trying to take a deep breath, and you see it all the time. Like I was watching a basketball game, and they show a bunch of like a family dancing. It was like in Utah. And the family's dancing together, and they're all taking off their masks like little kids and, trying to suck up some oxygen and then putting their mask back on. JoJo does this, where the people pinch the mask and put it down below their chin and take a couple of deep breaths and then put it back on. And so literally it's making it hard for people to breathe. And the American people, without a legitimate explanation, the only explanation they got is that the experts say this is what you're supposed to do. Trust the science, trust the expert, more, more bumper sticker rhetoric, right? It's just like the old bumper sticker stuff. And now when you go out, 99% of people are wearing masks. I mean, it just, everybody's accepted it. If you're not wearing it, you're considered a super spreader, a bad person who is putting other people at risk because of your selfish and careless behavior. That's how you're viewed. If you can see somebody's face, that means that's a bad person. And so this has been accepted that masks just should be worn. Like, this is just global right now. Like, everybody's supposed to do this and everyone's gonna do this, right? It has to be done. And this could go on for years. Like, how long before people just stop doing it? Like, even if the government didn't tell you, like, the government's like, oh yeah, it's over, but they didn't make an announcement and they got rid of the laws and the enforcement, they didn't tell anybody it's over, people would just keep on wearing them forever. Like, it's just, all right, we accepted it, this is life. And 100 years from now, you come back, people are still wearing masks and they never know why, right? Like, you go, oh yeah, because of the COVID thing. They're like, what are you talking about, COVID? No, we started wearing masks in 2020 because of COVID. It's 2120, right? It's 100 years from, and you come back in 100 years and everyone's wearing masks. You're like, yeah, we started wearing these back in 100 years ago because of this thing called COVID. Oh yeah, is that why we're wearing them? I don't know. Like, we just thought they were, this was just what we do, right? And so this is the state of humanity. Like, you can't really make a case for people, saving the human race, because that's what's on the table right now, whether you know it or not. It's saving the human race on planet Earth, because there is a lot of energy going towards just saying this is a failed species and needs to be wiped out. Like, this stuff is a display. The people that control the system, as bad as you want to demonize the people that you call the elite, that we all call, what I call the controllers and you guys call the elite. I mean, you all have different names for it. As much as people want to demonize them, look at what our leaders are working with. Not that our leaders are great or evolved, because they're not. They're the worst of the worst. But look at what they're working with. Like, look at what we're all working with in terms of humanity. And I'm not saying that in a way like I'm so much better. Like, I know what I've struggled with, and I know my own character flaws and things like this. At least in terms of the heartfulness system, I have become a better person, right? And that's why, I talk about the heartfulness system, because it's the only thing out there. It's the only, stream of thought or option, solution. It's the only solution out there. That's what I should say. Solution that's being pitched that is about human beings evolving to a higher level. All these other solutions, like martial law is a solution, or Joe Biden as a solution, the Democrat solution, the Agenda 21 solution, the revolution solution, the overthrowing of the government. Like, if you look at all the things that people are saying out there in terms of religious solutions, nobody is talking about making human beings or helping human beings to evolve to a higher level of consciousness. The only thing out there that says that is, that's the primary function, is to help people get closer to God and rise up to become saints, to take ordinary schlubs, right? Take ordinary fools, ordinary dopes, and raise them up, help them raise up to a level of saints. And it's been done. Like, there is successful examples in the heartfulness system, lots of them, where ordinary people have been, helped with their own effort, because you got to work at it. It's not like some gift. You got to participate. You got to, bring it. You can't just, it's not a system that just turns you into a saint. Like, you got to work at it, and you got to work at your character and things. So it's not easy, because human beings are, right now not the best candidates to be saints. But the system actually works. It delivers. Like, it, not for everybody, because, you're an X factor, but it can turn an ordinary schlub that works hard and, participates and cooperates with the system. It can turn an ordinary fool, an ordinary dope, into a saint, right? And so it's the only thing out there that helps to raise the level of consciousness. Is what has to happen. And so will it happen? I don't know, because the system works. I have 100% faith in the heartfulness system because of my own experience with it. But again, I got, 80 to 90% lack of faith in human beings. I mean, I'm not, I can't predict the future or what's going to happen, but I have, 100% faith in the system. But in terms of human beings cooperating, which is a key element, because you have to cooperate, you have to choose it. It's not going to force itself on you. There's no force in the heartfulness system. People have to actually choose it, and not just once. Like, it's not like signing your name and becoming a member and you're going to become a saint. Like, you enroll in some sort of black belt program and you just pay the money and they just keep on giving you more belts even though you can't fight for shit, right? Like, they say, oh, you're a black belt. Yeah, because, you paid $5,000 over 2 years to become a black belt. That's not, but you're not certainly Bruce Lee, right? And so it's not like that. You have to actually become a saint. It's not like you get a certificate saying you're now a saint, like, in The Wizard of Oz, when the wizard is, giving fake hearts out there, fake brains, gives the scarecrow a diploma and things like whatever. You're now a great thinker. No, it's not like that. You actually have to become a saint. Like, so it's something where you have to transform to a higher level of consciousness, where you have to be, better, a better version of yourself, and you have to have a deeper relationship with God, and you have to go on a spiritual journey and go through all the difficulties to help you do that, right? And it's not like reading a book and having some epiphany. Like, you have to actually do internal work on your internal self, and allow the cleaning and the transmission to flow through you in these things to help divinize what's inside of you. And so again, it's the only thing out there, it's the only solution that has that as its primary goal. Religions don't want you to be a saint. Religions don't want you to evolve spiritually. They want you to be a sheep. They talk about you being a sinner or a sheep or whatever it is, right? You're a part of the flock. They don't want you to connect to God and have your own relationship with God, because then they lose control over you. So, I mean, this is the only thing out there that is about human beings evolving. And that's why I talk about it all the time, because it's, to me, the only solution. And it would work. I know it would 100% work if human beings cooperate. Not, we'll see if that happens. Like right now, it's hard to say because people are so addicted and they're so lost and they're so low functioning. But maybe after a collapse of the system or some other things come into play, plus people are being worked on an abstract level, because people's souls have already chosen this, right? People's souls want this because that's their primary purpose, is to evolve and grow and get closer to God. But their egos and their consciousness hasn't, and is, rebelling against it. And so there's an internalized battle between, the soul work that's going on right now, the momentum that's building for people to rise up spiritually, because it is, and awaken. And this is part of the awakening process, right, to the corruption of the system and the government. But it's really about your own personal failure, our own personal failures, and wanting to become something better. And people just, for the most part, don't want to become something better. They think they're great the way they are. You talk to most people, and then if you ask them the right questions, or you get talking about the right subject, they'll expose it to you, that they think they're great and they're a knower and everybody else sucks and everybody else, should listen to them. That's the whole problem behind the truth community. Very few people are willing to grow and evolve and change for themselves. But this is like game time, right? Like this failure that's just happened with social media and the JoJo presidency and the mask wearing are just one of many examples of the failure of human consciousness and poor decision making. It's right there in front of you, right? The middle line of the heartfulness prayer, we are yet but slaves of wishes. And the yet but is the important part. I didn't cover that. I talked about this the other day. It's that we are yet but slaves of wishes. We're not slaves of wishes. We are slaves of wishes now. But in the future, we can be something better. And that's the difference between religions, calling you a sinner or defining you as something, where you can evolve past that. The yeah, but is, yeah, for now, I'm a slave of wishes. But someday in the future, I won't be, right? This is the goal of the system. For right now, I'm accepting being a slave to my desires and wishes and my own, worldview, my own internal, my own internal creation that's away from the divine creation. But as I work on this, eventually that won't happen, where you don't have to say the line anymore because you're no longer a slave of your own wishes. You're now somebody who's evolved spiritually, and you serve God, right? You put what God wants you to do, what others need you to do, ahead of your own desires and things like this, which people have evolved into being. It isn't like some human beings, like no human being has ever done that, right? And so once one human being does it, it opens the door for the whole species. And that lies where the hope is, right? The hope is that there have been saints and higher developed spiritual souls. There's been evolved beings on this planet that came from human genetic stock. They might come from a higher place in terms of their soul and their spiritual essence. They might have more talent than the average person. They might be more evolved in their subtle bodies, in their soul, in their spiritual essence. But they still achieve this as a human being. And that's these examples, these wonderful examples of saints and higher developed souls, spiritual masters that have been on this planet. And from that, we could say, all right, well, if these people achieve this, then there's a possibility I could, right? And because it doesn't take, you don't have to be a gifted athlete or a genius. You just have to have a good heart and work on your heart. And a heart is something you can change and develop and grow. And you just have to have a willingness to change and a faith in the divine process and a divine plan. And these are the things if you cultivate all of these things and you do the heartfulness system, then you'll become a higher developed soul. And even if you're just a little bit better, like I can say I'm a more loving and better person, right? I may not be the best person yet, right? I might not be a saint yet or whatever it is. There's no way to evaluate that. But I'm better than I was. At least I'm moving in the right direction in terms of what I am as a person, right? Doesn't matter what the elite are doing. Doesn't matter what you're doing. Doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. It matters that I am moving forward personally on my spiritual path. Doesn't mean, I don't still have character flaws and make mistakes because, again, it's a process. But are you moving forward? Are you stuck? Are you moving backwards? Those are your choices. In fact, being stuck isn't a choice because if you're stuck, you're moving backwards. And so you're either moving forward on your spiritual path or you're not. And that's the case. Most people are moving backwards on the human experience. That's why we're a failed species. Very few people are moving forwards. And so if the opportunity is there for you to move forwards, why wouldn't you take it? When you're miserable as you are now, and you're just getting more and more lonely and miserable and disconnected and things, your love is evaporating and you're just getting more and more angry and whatever it is. Why wouldn't you take that right now? If your life sucks so bad right now and you could become a better person, why the hell wouldn't you do it? I mean, I'm just saying that because this has been available now since, 100 years ago, the heartfulness method, and people flirt with it, people try it, people do whatever. And they say, oh, the transmission makes me feel good, and the cleaning makes me feel lighter, and I slept better for a couple of nights, and, I'll come back to that someday. And they go back to their miserable lives, right? They try it for, and they see that it works a little bit in a subtle way, and they're like, yeah, this might work or whatever. And on soul level, their soul is crying, yes, do this thing, right? It's the right thing for you. And so, and I'm not saying this because I want people to do it. I'm saying this because for me, it's the only viable solution out there. And, I know about it, so it's my duty to share it with people. And it has to run its course like everything else. Like I'm willing to sit back, just like I sat back for the Trump presidency, and I'm sitting back for the Biden presidency and seeing what direction it goes, how this is going to play out. Because, it has to run its course. And the heartfulness system is going to run its course in one way or another. And it may take so many thousands of years before, it becomes what it's supposed to become. It may take many incarnations for people to get up to where they need to be, to evolve to a higher level and change the vibratory field and the condition here on planet Earth to where human beings are just a different species. We have evolved to a higher level of consciousness, and we're not these, dopes that talk in bumper stickers. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.